Hey YouTube, the John Vanderveer. Today we're going to talk about the human condition. It's going to have some interesting stuff. I'd like to hear y'all's responses whenever we're done. So this is a continuation of the series of a proper worldview. And this worldview is not meant to be specific. It's not meant to say what you or I should do, what you or I should believe. It's meant to be general for all humans. Is there a general worldview that all humans logically do or should or must adopt? Any of the above? And if it does exist, what does it look like? So obviously, if we're going to discuss a general worldview for all humans, we need to talk about the human condition itself. And that's what this video is about. So I'm going to list out some things that are and some things that aren't, and I'm going to just kind of stick with the most important. It's not meant to be all-inclusive. In fact, I can assure you there are some things I left out, because to list out all the things that humans aren't would take eternity. So let's just get to it. The first would be the law of unobservable phenomena. Now, I did a whole video on this, and I'll include it in the playlist. It'll either be before this video or after, I'm not sure. And you can, of course, go check it out on my channel. And what this essentially boils down to is the imperfect ability of all humans to ascertain, process, and retain information. It's kind of like that old saying, you know, nobody's perfect, except this is talking with respect to the way we think, not the way we act. Nobody's perfect in the way we think. Empirical data comes in, we take some of it, and some of it passes us by. So we've already been imperfect. We can't take in all the information, we just select some. Then that selection we take, we process it, and that processing, that way we think about it, is limited by certain filters or our experience or maybe our genetic code or whatever it may be. And it's biased and reformed. And then we draw a conclusion from it, which may or may not be true. And then we attempt to retain that conclusion. And sometimes we forget it, sometimes we misremember it. So essentially what this boils down to is that we can't trust what we think in our brain. And that's not to say we can't do anything with it, but it is to say we need to regard it as either not necessarily true or true but maybe not the whole truth. So that's the law of unobservable phenomena. Here's number two. That is the essential trait of human irrationality. And this kind of comes from the law of unobservable phenomena, which says that we kind of incorrectly interact with information to create beliefs. And the human trait of essential irrationality says that we do not act in a perfectly rational way, like some people would like us to believe. Psychologists, economists, just people of all sorts, sociologists, scientists in general, really, like to say that everything we do is the result of a rational decision, or a rational principle is at work in everything we do, we could say. Well, I would like to submit that that is not true. I would like to submit that as much as we want to be rational, because of our nature, we act irrationally. Even if our intent is to be rational, it doesn't pan out, because the rational principle that we may seek to follow, we may misunderstand or misremember, or we may remember it perfectly, although that's unlikely. And when it comes to acting, we imperfectly act that principle. And when I say imperfect, I don't mean with regard to good or bad. I just mean with regard to what it is, with regard to that principle. In other words, say I want to run 100 meters in 10 seconds and I run it in 9 seconds. I was 90% perfect in that sense. You see what I'm saying? I'm really using it as a term of efficiency, not good or bad. So that's the unique trait of irrationality. Also, I'd like to add that you don't just need to logically deduce this. You can really observe it in day-to-day life. People act irrationally whenever you take a survey, and let's say the logical answer is 10, and it's on a scale from 1 to 20, you'll see a normal distribution a lot of times for whatever the question may be. And this shows that people aren't consistent. If people were consistent, if everyone was perfectly rational, they would all answer the same answer, and it would be the rational answer. But even in situations where a particular answer is the rationally correct answer, people will vary their answers. So that's one way people are irrational. Here's another way. They will contradict themselves. If people were perfectly rational, they wouldn't contradict themselves. And you can say, well, that's an irrationality of action, not an irrationality of thought, but I would argue with you. And finally, here's the other way, is that humans, we have our frontal lobe, and we can override our sort of more logical or evolutionarily refined brainstem that is sort of just based off the carrot and the stick. So this frontal lobe that's not based on the carrot and the stick can do things completely arbitrarily, devoid of rationality. I can join up in a 5K marathon just for kicks. I can do that just to do it. And you don't see other forms of animals doing this kind of thing. And finally, the supposed part of our brain that's responsible for rational behavior doesn't fully develop till we're something like 21, 22. So what are we before then? If we're less than completely rational, we are essentially, to a degree, irrational. Now, I'm not saying humans are 100% irrational, although that could be argued. I'm just saying, in my opinion, we have rationality and irrationality, and they're intermixed. But the irrationality does exist. We're not completely rational beings like some would have us think. So that's the essential trait of irrationality. Here's another simpler one. We have a finite lifetime. We live and we die. People can talk about resuscitation. Somebody legally dies or medically, technically dies, and he's resuscitated. Okay, well, in common speech, we would just say that he never really died. And that would be the way to say it in common speech, although medically it wouldn't be correct. Well, technically he died, yes. Yes, but if we talk about his life, it encompasses, from the time he really lived to the time he really died. And we can go over to religious beliefs and talk about what about Jesus, and did he never die, or did he die and resurrect? And I just want to point out that when I'm talking about the human condition, I'm not talking about spiritual matters. So if you want to say, well, his body died, but his spirit never died, I'm all for that. What I'm saying is that humans, what I'm saying is that's an inhuman act. If it occurred, it's an inhuman act to just not die. We all die. So we're, in addition to being restricted by time, we're also restricted by nature in general. Physically, people can only jump so high. There are restrictions on our will. Here's an argument: free will. Do we have free will? Well, I'm agnostic to that, really. I don't think it can be known if we have free will or not. We do have, at least most of us have the perception of free will. But even that perception of free will is a perception of free will of choice between choices we are given by nature. So in other words, it's not that we get to pick any number we want. It's that nature says, here is 1 through 10, pick one of them. In other words, if free will was perfect and I could do absolutely whatever I wanted, I could go underwater and breathe and be just fine. Or I could fly around like a little fairy. But we all know that that's not possible, for humans anyway. I suppose if you are a little fairy, you could do that. So part of the human condition is being limited by nature. You can say that a different way: being given choices to choose from, but all the choices are allowed by nature. And then the question is, are you really choosing it all? That's a debate for another video. So We all have experience. Experience is part of the human condition. But each of our experiences are essentially unique. No two people are exactly the same. Even twins are essentially different. Even if in minor or subtle ways, every life and every life experience is different. But in sort of an ironic way, we all have in common that each of our lives are different. So there's another common trait. And so that basically covers what I'm going to list out as the human condition. Here are some things that are not the human condition. We are not uniquely human because we have highly advanced ability to interact socially or to abstract and think. Abstraction and thinking, a lot of people say this is essentially a human thing to do, but I would submit that people who are mentally retarded or suffer from brain damage, and I'm being completely serious when I say this, I would submit they're still human. And therefore, who would contend that these people are competent to create rational abstract structures and socially interact when many of these so-called mental illnesses are by definition an inability to social interact or something of that nature? So I would say that our sociality and our advanced intelligence relative to other animals is not essentially human. It's kind of icing on the cake in some instances, but that's not what makes us human. I would also say that selfishness is not what makes us human. You know, I study economics, and in all my classes, the assumption behind the economic model, in any model we take, is that a person will seek to maximize their own utility, which is a fancy way of saying people are selfish. But this is not essentially true, and it's a flaw in many lines of thinking. Although people like this are rare, there are people who are genuinely selfless people, people who die for their country, people who just give away all their money to the poor. And this is further evidence that flies in the face that humans are rational people. Actually, that could be argued that they're behaving rationally by being charitable. But regardless, there are genuinely selfless people. So selfishness is not part of the human condition. Here's another thing that's not part of the human condition. And that is objectivity. You know, very few people would assert that objectivity is part of the human condition. Most people assert that we strive to be objective, we just can't. We're subjective, we formulate our own opinions. And so that's not really a point that brings up much debate, but it's still a point worth noting. Just as we all imperfectly ascertain, process, etc., information, that sort of leads to our own unique set of beliefs. And we should recognize that that unique set of beliefs is not the same as the truth of the things we're really believing in. And we can get into a debate about what is truth and all this, but suffice it to say that if I think this is yellow, let's say that's true, and if somebody else thinks that's blue, this color here, blue like my shirt, then that's wrong. And you can say, well, you think it's blue. You know, you think it's blue, it's not really blue. And that's a debate that we can have in a different video. But I would submit that if you act on those ideas, that this color is red or something like that, or it's perfectly fine to jump off the top of a 50-foot cliff head first, that you're open to have that worldview. But I would submit that nature is going to check your belief system. And so this video is sort of leading into what will be one of my last videos, is nature as a belief checker, or nature as a worldview checker. And we'll touch on that concept some more. But suffice it to say that we're subject to nature, and what that leads to is that although we may have our subjective ideas, those subjective ideas do not entail reality. So that's another part of the human condition, is we're not objective, we're subjective. All right, take care, YouTube, and see you in the next video.